assess the reality of creation at this stage. A mineral involution evolution which creates a mineral consciousness, a vegetable involution evolution which creates a plant consciousness, an animal involution evolution which creates an animal consciousness, at the end of which man's privilege, self-consciousness, appears. After a fourth cycle, universal consciousness appears. It is the path of reintegration. Therefore, each of the focal points represents a potential man, and each one of us on this earth carries in himself the original point of his being. This point is the absolute androgynous man. It is the first of the 10 levels. We previously mentioned that energy densifies in 10 levels or 10 stages of consciousness and density. It occurs in the same way in each focal point of a potential being. At the second level, the division occurs inside. It does not manifest. Man still belongs to the domain of eternity, but he now carries in him the future duality which will result in the appearance of the sexes. At the third level, which still belongs to the domain of eternity, duality is still potential, but a new element appears which is the potentiality of form. These 3 levels are the levels of the universal man, the first Adam, of the Garden of Eden, that is, man's state before his voluntary involution. At these levels, the being is always androgynous. Adam and Eve are only potential. The universal femininity and masculinity are not yet manifest. This androgynous state is always present in each of us, and it is the sole part of our being which will remain till the end of time. Our necessary involution and devolution will, in a sense, form a matrix for and liberate this part of ourselves. The 3 highest levels in man represent the presence called the Divine Trinity by exoteric religions. Man is a God who voluntarily fell from grace to forge, alone, his being and his freedom. All lower levels belong to the various domains of space and time. Time is a creation of Saturn, and, as we mentioned in Lesson 2, Figure 1, Saturn devours his children. All that which issues from time has a beginning and an end. All that which proceeds from eternity is. Man's lower levels are prodigious barriers separates level 3 from level 4. This is the genuine descent into hell. Man leaves eternity for space, time. He leaves the Garden of Eden, second Adam, Adam and Eve. Here and now, duality manifests in every domain, space-time, matter. In the previous lesson, we attempted to explain the densification of the space-time duality. As soon as man enters duality, he loses the androgynous state. The separation of the sexes takes place, but it occurs progressively, as does space/time. There is a densification of the separation of the sexes, not only in man but in all things, which corresponds to the densification of matter and time. Alchemists thus consider the existence of the 3 male metals, the red metals, iron, copper and gold, and the 3 female metals, silver, lead and tin. Only mercury, which is a liquid metal, is considered androgynous. Therefore the 2 polarities exist at all levels of the manifest. The focal point, or man's consciousness, continues its involution into matter and descends, one by one, the steps of Jacob's ladder. We explained in Lesson 2 that each level is coherent, that is to say that the densities matter-energy man remain harmonious, and that conscious life is possible for man of Earth at each level. The goal of creation for this operation of involution is simple, to allow original, man's consciousness to progressively adapt to denser levels so that it can reach the 7th day, level 10, where the density of matter, for all practical purposes, breaks all conspicuous links between man and the higher levels, so that man, who is ignorant of his true identity, can acquire, with almost complete free will, all the elements necessary for his return. He will build himself. At each step of the path he is what he has forged himself to be, in order to become the son of his deeds, at the end of times. Only a unique force, a kind of pressure, acts upon man. This force compels man to evolve, during involution, to descend the levels of consciousness. Then, when he has acquired the various necessary elements, man receives the initiation of the nadir, and the force changes direction. Man is compelled to evolve and to ascend the levels of consciousness, but with the complete freedom of choosing his return path. A genuine initiation is a modification of man's inner structure, ensuring that the contact between the various levels of consciousness is re-established. In the case of the initiation of the nadir, which can only take place when man has attained the lowest level of involution, its effect is not to re-establish the link between the various levels of consciousness, but to reverse the relationship among man's inner forces. Man's consciousness in the various levels. There is a last important point that should be brought up concerning the structure of the levels among themselves. At this highest level, man of eternity who started his involution from level 1, returns to level 1 after his evolution. His state of consciousness is then a consciousness of the totality of the universe, but unitary. At level 10, man is already closer to realized man because his consciousness, in our world, is also unitary. As above so below. It is not the case in the intermediary levels where consciousness is specifically not unitary. At levels 7, 8, 9, which constitute what occultists call the lunar astral world, man's consciousness simultaneously includes the three levels. Man lives in a triple space-time because this world contains 3 days of creation. It is the same for levels 4, 5, 6, which constitute the solar astral world. It is necessary to meditate on the lunar astral and solar astral worlds in order to be able to interpret the experiences of conscious contact on the one hand, and fleeting images or perceptions on the other hand. Only when you have reached the highest levels of consciousness in the lunar or solar world, does your consciousness simultaneously include the three inner worlds. The planet's influence on man. In addition, the various levels of density have been assigned to planets and corresponding organs of the human body. Knowing these correspondences is of importance for a practical application of esotericism. In order to understand the planet's influence upon man, it is first necessary to reverse the current scientific concepts according to which life proceeds from matter. Every esoteric adept is progressively and eventually led to the following concept. First, there is the being. The being creates consciousness for his evolutionary needs. Consciousness creates life. Life creates matter in order to possess the appropriate support and matrix for its activities and realization. A second concept should be considered. The universe is a gigantic man. Our galaxy is a living being with the 10 levels of consciousness, and in a similar way but at a lower level, so is our solar system. The organization, or rather the physical manifestation of the solar being, is different from that of man. But you can find the same 10 levels of consciousness. Each planet exists because it is the material, concrete form of a level of consciousness at the focal point of its energy. The levels are equivalent in man and in the solar being, therefore there is a harmonious link between them and a reciprocal action of one upon the other. Each planet has a twofold aspect which corresponds to the duality of its level. The cosmic wind. When primary energy leaves eternity for space-time, it takes on a double, active and passive aspect, but separates into several types of energy. As the white light of the sun splits into beams of colored lights when it passes through a prism, so does the energy crossing the abyss, split into 7 colors, into 7 different aspects, each of which has a double, active and passive polarity. Each of these colors of energy is in tune with a planetary genius, a second cause, lesson 2, and a planet, and forms one of the consciousness levels of the manifest world. A new aspect of this energy appears simultaneously which activates the drive for evolution. It is a kind of pressure of being, as previously mentioned, or a cosmic wind. It is not easy to speak of the cosmic wind because the name used for this subject has already been confused by misinterpretations by individuals analyzing the sacred texts of the Christian religions. Before he crosses the veil of the abyss while he still belongs to the domain of eternity, man is called Elohim, and his structure is tuned to the unspeakable Hebrew word that is, the 4 letters of the Tetragrammaton, Yod He Vav He. Hebrew is read from right to left. The study of this name is interesting. We have the letter Yod, which represents the universal active principle, and the set He Vav He, which represents the universal passive principle. The double occurrence of he symbolizes the preponderance of the passive aspect in the being during the descent. Vav can be considered a symbol of knowledge, both in the form of temptation of knowledge or in the form of acquired knowledge. When the abyss is being crossed, as we saw, Yod is separated from he Vav he. Adam and Eve separate from the androgynous being. Thus androgynous man carries in himself the double, male and female, passive and active aspect but in the form of duality, whereas before the abyss was crossed the whole was unitary and undivided. Now the cosmic wind is going to influence man by urging him, in his dual or double aspect, to journey through matter. The involutionary force, Satan, influences the principles he Vav he and therefore constrains man to descend into matter, one step at a time until he is covered with the skins of beasts, that is, incarnated in the material human body of earth. The whole biblical narrative about the serpent, Eve and Adam is an allegory of this descent into the material world. When man has descended all the way down to level 10, the world we live in, he experiences a sequence of incarnations until he acquires the adequate mental structure for him to grow. Then, he receives from the invisible the initiation of the nadir. At that moment, the principle Yod of the duality becomes dominant and will dominate, for the duration of the evolution. The principle he Vav he which used to dominate the principle Yod during involution. For man who receives the initiation of the nadir, the return journey toward eternity has begun. The Satan aspect no longer has a hold on him. Now the Lucifer aspect dominates. Do not forget that Lucifer is the light bearer. The light which is carried by this aspect of the cosmic wind will bring the enlightenment needed for the return journey. Now the temptation of light replaces the temptation of darkness, the temptation of matter. Satan and Lucifer are not individuals beings, but they are the resultants of the influence of the cosmic wind appropriate to man's state. When passive is stronger, the action of the wind is Satan, involution, that is, the descent into the darkness of matter. When active is stronger, the action of the cosmic wind is then Lucifer, evolution, that is, the return to the eternal light. Another double aspect of the cosmic wind is good and evil. During involution, good is that which provokes things toward the descent, evil that which makes them ascend. During evolution, good is that which helps ascend and evil that which hinders, in particular, attachment to the leaden weight of matter. In fact, it is good to meditate on Saturn's lead, level 3, and on the presence of the same symbol on the junction, allowing one to pass the veil of birth and death. Note: concerning the following terms, active, passive, positive, negative, and descent or fall, confusion should be avoided. In fact, these words have become loaded with unconscious meanings as time has passed and consequently have been unconsciously confused with the notions of good and evil. However, in nature, this is not the case. The positive is the acting energy, the negative is the energy constituting the element which is acted upon. One is necessary for the other. If one is missing, action is impossible. In the case of the double laws, the positive aspect of the law provokes the ascent, the densification, but it can occur only if densification, descent, has been previously accomplished. The descent or densification takes place when the passive, or negative, aspect has priority. The ascent or densification occurs if the active, or positive, aspect of energy has priority. Energy is neither good nor evil, it is. The previous lesson and this one which completes it, are the hardest to grasp in the entire class of fundamentals of esoteric knowledge. We recommend that you study them frequently until you can easily achieve an inner resonance with the ideas. Oratory work always follow the rules of Lesson 1 proposed exercise. Meditation on Saturn. Start with the mirror exercise. Lesson 2, close your eyes as soon as you reach the black or just before you become submerged by the cold if such is the case. Visualize the symbol of Saturn, that is, obtain a mental picture of it in your mind. As soon as you successfully visualize it, do not think of anything. When the meditation is complete, note the symbols or the lessons you perceived or experienced. Be very careful, you may experience a feeling of eternity. close the work as previously indicated. This exercise is for those who successfully completed the checkerboard exercise and the mirror exercise. It is for those only. Make haste but slowly. Note, meditation is a passive action, we are being meditated. The active aspect corresponds to the work of visualization. The passive aspect corresponds to the stage where we no longer think. This state of passivity should be maintained so you can hear the answer. Especially at first, the answer is weak and the smallest residual or parasitic mental activity can drown it out. A progressive but complete mental silence is necessary. Try to do as the fisherman does. The fisherman throws in the bait and waits until the fish bites. How to use the notebook. Lesson 1. Write down your night experiences in the oratory, regularly. Before you go to bed, examine the notebook. On Monday night, for example, study the night or oratory experiences of the previous Monday night and that of the previous Mondays. Particularly focus on the Monday for weeks earlier. Thus fix in your memory what happened sensibly at the same lunar phase as the one you find yourself in. For the oratory, review the experiments which followed the work proposed with time and improvements. You can practice the same exercise on the same day of the week. It is best to do so. Ora et labora. The philosophers of nature. Appendix and figure. Appendix, the zero and the infinite. Article from the Little Philosopher. Figure #1, Man and the Universe. Appendix #1, the zero and the infinite. Article from the Little Philosopher. When one is on the mystical path, the belief that man's existence is limited to a single passage on earth does not seem logical nor rational. As soon as intuition, inner experience, or a kind of mental pressure leads us to conceive of man as an evolving being, the only coherent explanation of existence seems to be that man begins at zero and moves toward the infinite. Indeed, when evolution has started, what obstacle could restrain it before it reaches the infinite stage? It is obvious that man cannot pass from zero to the infinite during the course of his life on earth, as long as it may be. In addition, if this life were man's sole experience, the differences in conditions and duration could bring him to doubt the equity of the creative power. Thus, logically, we are led to admit the plurality of man's experiences, whether this plurality is lived on earth or elsewhere. Nowadays, a growing number of people agree on the idea of reincarnation. Some find that it explains and justifies the apparent injustices of this world, others believe they have reminiscences from a faraway past. But our position as practitioners of experimental mysticism somewhat differs from all that is generally said on the subject. First, we say that only personal inner experience can reveal the essence of the other planes of existence different from that of Earth. Personal inner experience, however, because of its very nature, cannot be communicated to others. The conclusions resulting from personal experience can be accepted by someone who did not personally have them, only insofar as he trusts the individual who is attempting to explain such experiences. The first thing we can say is that man has four principal levels of consciousness, that conscious existence is possible in each level, and that consequently evolutionary existence is not the exclusive privilege of life on Earth. The question which comes up for most people is what remains from one life to the next? Here most explanations cease to be coherent. We said earlier that man has four levels of existence which can be summarized